Hello, and welcome to another episode of Teaching with Inquiry Live. Tonight, we are going to go right back to the beginning. And as we start and we're into our brand new year, what I really wanted to do tonight is get all on the same page and really go over what inquiry-based learning looks like for me. And it kind of set apart that framework so that you understand kind of where I'm coming from every week as I'm talking about all of the different elements that might happen in an inquiry-based classroom. So we're going to go and break back to the basics. We're going to break down what inquiry-based learning is and really look at the 10 essential guiding elements that I am definitely using in my classroom, the kind of that foundational understanding. So we're really going to dig into that. So thank you very much for joining me. If this is the very first time that you're catching Teaching with Inquiry Live, welcome. I'm so happy that you're able to join us. My name is Patty. I am a 4-5 teacher in Ontario, Canada, and I have been using inquiry-based instruction in my classroom for a while now. And I love being able to come live every Monday night and have you join me as we talk about all of the various facets of being able to use inquiry in your classroom. So I have lots and lots of information on my website about using inquiry, but tonight specifically, as I'm noticing in some of my Facebook groups, I'm getting a whole bunch of new to inquiry teachers coming in, and they're all just getting started. So I really wanted to, again, go back to basics and really cover what the 10 essential building block elements are of inquiry and really answering that question, what is inquiry-based learning? So for me, inquiry-based learning is it's just a way of teaching that might look a little bit different in your classroom today than maybe classrooms of, say, 20 years ago. It's a way of teaching that allows your students to have more ownership and control over what they are learning. So it's not just teacher-directed learning where the teacher makes all of the decisions and students are passive receivers of information, but it is a way to have students being actively involved in the learning that's happening in your classroom. So that means that the teacher is listening to the students and is open to learning opportunities that may come up, something that may go a bit beyond the lesson plan, which sometimes for us as teachers is a little bit scary when something isn't 100% planned out straight from the beginning. Inquiry allows teachers the flexibility to not necessarily have everything laid out and planned to the minutia. It allows us to go with the flow. It allows us to be responsive to student learning, and we don't always necessarily need to have the end planned out. So really, for us in a classroom, that means we don't have to have all the answers to all of the questions. And it gives us the permission to not have every single little detail planned out before we even begin. That a lot of that planning and teaching work that we have been spending hours and hours doing at home can be done with our students in the classroom. So it does free up a little bit of that need to be constantly, every minute of every day, be super planned. For me, inquiry-based learning allows students to have voice and choice in their classroom. It also means students can see themselves as an active contributor in their classroom to their own learning. They have a level of responsibility in their classroom to make sure that they have ownership on what it is they're doing. They are not just passive participants in your classroom, but they are actively involved in constructing and co-constructing the learning goals, the success criteria, and the outcomes of the things that they are going to be learning. That doesn't mean that they're doing it completely on their own. It just means that they're involved and that we're listening to them, which, because their voice is heard, because sometimes we're responding to their ideas and their suggestions in the classroom, that automatically ups that opportunity for engagement because they feel as though they have ownership over it. We've probably all sat in meetings as adults where when you are just told, here, sit down, watch this, and listen to this presentation because it's mandated that you have to do it, we're probably not super engaged in what's happening. But when it's our own ideas and it's something that we want to try, you might be a bit more engaged in it. So I think that that can translate into what we're doing in our classrooms with our students. So for me, I want to cover 10 elements tonight of some specific things that I think are really important to keep in mind when we're using inquiry-based instruction. And they're part of my, say, 10 essential guiding principles that I like to keep focused on when I'm using inquiry in my classroom. Number one is letting go of control and stop micromanaging every aspect of the day for all of your students. You don't need to know all of the answers. Now, it doesn't mean that you're going to let go of everything. As a teacher, you're still controlling the environment. You may not always be controlling the direct path of everything that your students are doing. Think about like you're going on a road trip. So if you know that you've got to start at point A and the curriculum tells you you have to finish at point B, you don't need to necessarily know how you're going to get there, just that you need to be able to get to that finish line. But if you share with your students, okay, we're going to be learning at the end, I need to have evidence that you're going to do this. Listen to what their suggestions are of how they can achieve that. Sometimes it means that you can go deep into one subtopic and you might not necessarily cover other subtopics as opposed to just getting a surface level understanding. Sometimes it means you can dig deep and follow their lead. The goal is to get to that end goal, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be the one that is finishing up and you have to plan every stop along the way. You can ask your students to help you plan those stops. So again, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing everything on their own, but it could mean that they are helping you to plan how you're going to get from point A to point B in that learning journey. Number two, for my guiding essential principles for inquiry is definitely listening to your students and allowing them voice and choice. So you want to listen to what it is that they want to do, but you also want to embed choice in that as well. You want to give students the opportunities to follow some of their own passions and allow them to present information to you in a variety of ways and to show their learning in multiple different ways. So right in there, you've got some differentiation because you are allowing students a variety of ways to show that they have learned something. So it's not always a test and it might not always be a poster. And I like to think that I don't want all of my students to show their learning in exactly the same way. If I'm finding that they're all doing the same thing, and then perhaps I've been prescribing too much for them. So I definitely want to give them that freedom to focus on telling me what they've learned in a unique way that allows them to be the most successful, to draw on some of their strengths as individual learners so that they can show me in a way that is reflective of their strengths and needs. It means that I need to plan out the provocation for my students. I need to think about a way that I can provoke their thoughts and their interests, but that I necessarily need to plan out how I get there. But I can ask them their opinions, I can ask them for information, and they can help make that roadmap with me. So really listening to them is a good way to embed some inquiry. So for example, today in my classroom, we did a math activity where I asked students, if we have an open house and we want to serve hot dogs at the open house, what math might we need? This led students into thinking, by the end of the lesson, they were thinking about maybe not hot dogs, but maybe they could sell other things. And that could be a fundraising opportunity for them to support different clubs and things that they want to do in their classroom. Not necessarily exactly where I was thinking we might be going, but listening to their excitement and their passion for what it was that we were talking about definitely led us in a different path than I was expecting. And it's okay to go with them on that journey. Number 4 is knowledge building. And this is a big shift, I think, for most teachers. Understanding that your voice is not the one that should be heard most often in your classroom. So when you have students and you ask a question, not always being every second voice or not always being the predominant voice in your classroom, and pausing and allowing for students to respond to other students' ideas without you always being the one to dictate how that conversation goes. Now, this is definitely something that grows over time. It's September right now. If you've just gone back to school in the month of September, having your knowledge building where all of the control is released to your students is probably a little soon, but you want to start prepping them for this, that eventually you are going to be talking less and they are going to be doing more of the talking, and really focus on training them to listen to other students' ideas. So often students get so used to the routine of school that teacher asks a question, student responds, teacher paraphrases, another student responds, teacher paraphrases. And what that often trains our students to do is not to listen to one another and only listen to Ike, because they know building happens when we come together as a community of learners, not just you listen to my voice talking all day long. It also helps on you losing your voice, because that's an issue, especially as teachers. When we're talking a lot, we are using our voice so many times. So getting the idea across to them that they need to listen to the ideas of one another and also build upon the ideas of other students as well. So number 5 is stop working so hard. And I find if I am working harder than my students at getting learning happening in my classroom, the learning that is happening in my classroom isn't as valuable as when I'm working less or I'm feeling like I'm doing less of the work. And I think we put so much pressure on ourselves as teachers to do all of these things that sometimes we put way too much pressure on ourselves, and we need to kind of back off and remember that if we are building a community of learners, if we are increasing student voice and choice, and we're collaboratively coming up with these ideas together, that it's okay that we are not doing all of the heavy lifting, that we're allowing our students to help us in some of that planning and some of those idea generations, so that we're not spending all of our time and effort planning every little detail and making sure everything goes exactly according to plan. So it means that we have to relax a little bit, and we have to be more comfortable with things going off plan and allowing them to be able to follow their direction that they go, but also being able to pull it back. So sometimes I like to think of more of a big idea, and as long as I'm sitting within that big idea, anything that happens amongst that kind of big idea is okay with me. I might not necessarily know what happens or what's going to happen in that or how it's going to go. I might have a rough sketch of how I think it should go, but I'm also okay and open to a different path if that presents itself. And I might follow and get onto tangents, and I'm okay with it. And it's okay to follow their lead. My 6th thing for the essential element is question everything. Question everything they do. Constantly be asking them questions, getting them thinking of their answers, asking them to dig deeper. So when they come to you with a question, returning it back onto the question and asking them what they think, getting them to stop relying on you as the solver of all their problems and begin to get them to push through and have them start solving some of their own problems. I find a lot of students rely on us to do a lot of that problem solving, and they are not so self-reliant. So getting them to rely less on us and getting them to rely more on themselves and trusting themselves that they can and are capable of solving the problem is an important skill. And I find one of the best ways to do that is by questioning. So they'll ask you a question and you can return it back to them in a question and say, so if they come up to you and ask you, how do I do this? You can say, how do you think you do this? What do you think the answer might be to that? What would you do if what would happen if you had asked somebody else that question? Or what would you do if I wasn't here? How would you go about solving this? Getting them to really think about what they would do if they didn't always have you there, if they had to do that by themselves. Now, I always try to preface this with, you understand why I'm asking you this question, because I want you to become a problem solver. I want to help you grow your brain. But if I always answer those questions for you, I'm not doing what I can possibly be doing for you. I can do so much more if I help to support you in being where I need you to be. Number 7 on my essential tips for inquiry is embrace failure. And it doesn't mean that I'm setting them up for failure, but what it means is celebrate the journey of learning. So don't always celebrate the end. It's not always about the culminating task or about getting the A on a test. And there's definitely a spot for testing and inquiry, but you want to also embrace the idea that learning is hard. And learning will mean that there's going to be failure and that you're not going to get things the first time. And really building up those skills of grit and perseverance are also really important skills that we want our students to achieve, especially if we're talking early elementary. Building those skills now will serve those later. And that comes from being really supportive with students and sharing with them why it is that you might not answer those questions for them, what it is you're really trying to do, and why you are doing it. It also means that you need to be an enormous cheerleader for that learning process. When you see students making small gains, stop, celebrate, cheer for them, have a big party if you need to, but celebrate more the learning path that they're taking and the small growth goals that they're accomplishing, as opposed to just celebrating that final mark. Pay attention to when there's evidence of them growing and point that out to them and have them notice. Last week, you really struggled with this. This week, you're not struggling as much with this. Look how far you've come, and watch that journey so that they can then reflect back on those hard times when it was a struggle, and they can reflect on why it's not so much of a struggle and see evidence that they are growing as individuals. So celebrating failure is also about cheerleading for your students for when they do meet those baby steps and goal, but really on the idea that they learned. And don't do it all at once. That's my number 9 tip. Number 9 tip. You can't possibly jump full into inquiry and just let go of all the control all at once and throw caution into the wind and hope that it all works out. Unfortunately, moving into this is a slow process. It means that there's a gradual release, not only for you to get comfortable with it, but it also means for your students. If this is often the very first time that they're using this, or it's the first time with you that they're doing this type of learning, they need a lot of hand-holding as you gradually release that level of responsibility, where you're transitioning from you being in control to them having more control over their learning. It's uncomfortable for them. They're not used to it. And just dropping them off might be a little scary, and it might be a little bit difficult for you too. It's okay to jump into this gradually, to slowly release that control over time for your students, and understand that this is a process for not only them, but for you as a teacher, as you are getting used to it. And it's also, even though I have done this a couple of years, and still with every new group of students, I still gradually release that control to my students when they're ready for it. So I don't just go, but I make sure that this is a gradual thing that they get used to and get comfortable with before I really kind of let it go and get out of their way. And that leads me to the last one, is number 10, is you really have to plan for your obsolescence. You know that inquiry is working when you feel kind of useless as a teacher. And what I mean by that is when learning is happening in your classroom and you aren't involved, you don't have all of your fingers in every aspect that's happening in your classroom, and your students can accomplish learning goals without you needing to be in the thick of it the entire time. That's where you know that you have hit kind of the sweet spot with inquiry, and it feels so amazing because you become so proud of your students for getting to this point where they are in control of their learning, and they come to you with those really meaningful, important things. And it gives you that time to really work with the students that need that more support, because you've got your students working at this level where they can function in a knowledge building circle without you necessarily needing to be in it. So if you're teaching a split like me, watching students run a knowledge building circle with you not even in it, and you can hear their discussion and it's going, and you are then working with another grade or a small group of students helping to support them because they require more scaffolding, that's a very rewarding experience. And it's because of the hard work and training that you put into it, but you've got a plan that your students get to a point where they might not need you at every minute of every day to make sure that learning is happening, because they're taking control and ownership of their learning, because they're engaged in what it is they're doing, because they have that ownership and they understand where they're starting and where they're going. They don't need you. Your time can be focused on those that do need you all the time. And then learning happens in a different way. And that was the big payoff, is you push through these uncomfortable moments where it feels uncomfortable. You might be uncomfortable. Your students might be a little bit uncomfortable. Pushing through that, because what's at the other side of that discomfort is very rewarding for not only you and your students, and what you're creating is students that are ready to self-regulate their learning. You have students that are able to learn independently. They develop independent work skills. They develop confidence and understanding. If you've ever listened to students who have gone through this and asked them what they like about this, they love that they are in control, that they have the decision power, they have the idea of where they're going and that ownership, and they're part of it. When you feel like you own it, you're more engaged in it. And that really is the whole reason why I bought into Inquiry and why I show up every Monday night to talk about all of the different things that Inquiry does in your classroom. So I hope these 10 essential points of using Inquiry in your classroom has been a refresher for those of you that have seen lots of other shows on Teaching with Inquiry Live, or for those of you that are jumping in new to it. I hope it gives you an idea of where to start. If you want a few more tips and tricks, then let me walk you through a few more steps of really implementing Inquiry in your classroom and digging in deeper into things like knowledge building circles and wonder walls and differentiation, and what Inquiry can look like in all of the different subject areas that you might have to teach. I have a free course on my website. It's about a 6-session email course that I deliver to your email inbox every couple of days, all for 6 sessions. It's totally free. You just have to go to my website at www.madlylearning.com, and you will see it right there on the homepage for you to sign up for the Inquiry 101 course. And that just takes all of those 10 essential skills that we've been talking about tonight and goes a little bit deeper into that. And that's all for you for free on my website. So thank you very much for joining me. I hope that you found tonight's talk informative and gets your mind ready to go with some of those essential foundation elements of using inquiry-based learning in your classroom. I will see you again next week, Mondays at 9 p.m. And thanks so much for joining me. Have a wonderful night and an even better rest of your week. Bye for now.